Welcome. I'm your host, Ada Janiszewska, and in today's episode, we are turning our attention to the 62nd Annual Munich Security Conference. Joining us today is Dr. Jarosław Ćwiek-Karpowicz, Director of the PISM, who is at the site in Munich. And today we will talk about the Munich Security Conference, which is one of the world's largest gatherings focused on global security architecture. And this year's focus is on strengthening European security and defense. So what concrete steps might European leaders realistically agree on?
Still, we have a very strong American presence here among participants, State Secretary Marco Rubio and many other high officials from the United States. So I expect a very vivid and constructive discussion between both sides. I'm wondering whether we may expect something what we observed recently when Vice President J.D. Vance had a speech and was very critical towards Europe. Now I expect rather more positive and constructive attitude from Mr. Rubio, but we'll see.
So, do you see momentum toward greater EU strategic autonomy, or will NATO remain the central pillar of European defense?
Of course, for Europeans, it's a critical situation, assuming the fourth year of Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So still Europe is under the pressure, and we still don't know whether Russia will enforce their steps in Eastern Europe and, for example, will provoke NATO members in much hardest way than before. Of course, the Russian factor is still in our minds and US as well, but definitely it's Russia, which is, let's say, the biggest threat for Europe and which caused very strong reaction among Europeans and decision how we may invest more in our security strengths, what we may do collectively, how NATO may respond. Of course, some statements made by US politicians about the future of NATO are not very promising. However, I personally believe that thanks to such an event like Munich Security Conference, we may find still a common understanding between Europeans and Americans what NATO is and what is the future of NATO. And still, this is the biggest and the most reliable military alliance in the world.
And speaking of Russia, last year's conference was heavily shaped by Russia's war against Ukraine. So, how do you expect discussions around this topic to evolve this year?
I expect huge support for Ukrainians. I think that many European politicians should underline how Ukraine is capable to tear Russia military. We should have in our mind that after 4 years of Russian full-scale invasion, the progress of Russian army is not very sophisticated. I mean, they are still stuck in the front line, which was designed more or less some times ago, and the Ukrainian army is able to defend the country, what is very good, and still the European support is crucial. So I expect also nice words about Ukrainian army, but also some kind of mobilization among both Americans and Europeans, how we may help Ukraine better and what kind of weapons and financial resources we are able to collect.
Of course, Ukraine is at the heart of discussions and it's a very important issue for us Europeans. But how might developments in the Middle East shift the broader security dialogue? Because we know that US, the United States are very much engaged in this conflict.
A few weeks ago, Jared Kushner, a special envoy of President Trump, presented a special plan for Gaza Strip during the Davos conference in Switzerland. I think that now we should not expect a new plan, but rather some kind of explanation what Americans plan, what is their proposal to resolve Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I do not expect some miracle solutions, but rather an explanation how Americans would like to support demilitarization of Hamas and imposing a new power in Gaza Strip held by civilians. And this is exactly what Mr. Jared Kushner said a few weeks ago in Davos, that there is several bodies, international Palestinian and also military ones, which should be responsible for the militarization of Hamas and governance of Gaza Strip. Of course, for Hamas and for Israel, it's not 100% good plan from their perspective. So we'll see, but definitely we may agree that Americans are very much motivated to make this conflict resolved, to stop confrontation, to stop the war. And so far, they are not in a very bad position. I mean, there are less casualties than a few months ago, and the ceasefire is more or less obeyed by both sides. In Munich, I expect many questions to American colleagues, how they see Europe and how we may be supportive. Of course, Mr. Trump expressed already his idea about board of peace, but there are definitely other ways, including UN, where Europeans may be much more supportive. So also I expect a very interesting discussion about Middle East and American plans of implementation of the ideas which were already expressed.
And of course, the future of transatlantic relations is another key theme during this year's Munich conference. So, how would you assess the current state of U.S. European security cooperation? For instance, just earlier, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense, Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz, had stated that Polish-American security cooperation, for instance, would remain unchanged. But what about the rest of the Europe?
I mean, still, many European countries are interested in keeping American forces on our land. It's not by chance that the conference is taking place in Munich, in Bavaria, where there are thousands of US soldiers. And I expect rather positive conversation between, let's say, allies and friends. Many American soldiers are here in Germany for years, and definitely they are not interested in coming back home to United States, although the US officials from time to time express their will to reduce the number of US soldiers, of US troops in Europe. I do not expect harsh discussion about the reduction of number of US soldiers, but maybe there will be discussion about the weapons. Germany is one of the countries which plan to spend billion of US dollars for military equipment, also Poland and other countries. So definitely many people would like to reach some consensus in what extent Europeans should produce their own weapons and invest in our defense industry, but also in what extent we may closely collaborate with Americans and still buy American weapons and use American technologies.
But could this conference produce meaningful commitments, or is it more about just discussing, talking, and signaling political unity rather than really acting?
Well, it's a unique place where definitely so many people from both sides of Atlantic Ocean are coming here. So it's the best place for networking for sure. But also this place is quite famous when there are some very important speeches. Unfortunately, last speeches made, for example, by Vladimir Putin in 2008, or also J.D. Vance quite recently, I think they were publicly perceived as a very difficult, controversial, not positive speeches. Those statements, which are rather positive, unfortunately, are not underlined and repeated by media. So that's why this year, of course, we're waiting for Marco Rubio's speech, which would be delivered tomorrow. We'll see which point in his speeches would be the most, let's say, vocal and what will be discussed afterwards. But definitely it's a good place to reach some agreement between Americans and Europeans. So that's why there are so many side events. One of them is organized by the Polish Institute of International Affairs together with our Swedish partners, and both Defense Minister of Sweden and Foreign Minister of Poland, Radek Sikorski, and many other ministers and member of parliaments, they will attend our event, and we will jointly discuss how we may deter Russia on the Baltic Sea region in much better way, because Russian hybrid attacks, sabotage on the Baltic Sea is extremely expensive for us. and how we may prevent Russia from this kind of provocation. So this is one of the side events organized here. Many other think tanks, embassies, NGOs, they organize thematic side events. I'm very happy that as a director of PISM, I have a chance to attend in such events.
And of course, you mentioned Poland, and you also mentioned the fact that Europe should put more emphasis on its own military spending. And we know that Polish government has been very vocal about this issue. So what role is Poland likely to play in shaping the security agenda, given its strong position on defense and Eastern European security?
Of course, we have many things to say here on this forum. First of all, to explain how dangerous Russia policy and Russia war in Ukraine, how it influenced whole Europe, because many people maybe they adjust to the situation and forget a little bit about Russian threat. Secondly, we are very good ally of United States, and there are many positive statements made by US president before. So I think that we should use this. And if there will be some controversies and difficulties, I think that Polish voice may play a very positive role. And third point is, of course, the future of Europe. In this regard, I strongly believe that Poland and Germany should play a much more important role in Europe defense, and that's why there are many Polish and German officials and side events on this event. And definitely, these two countries are very close to Russian and Ukraine borders, and we should take more responsibility for NATO eastern flank, including Baltic states. And such a conference definitely would help us to build a good political agenda.
Of course, the Munich conference is set to wind up on Sunday. So, what outcomes from this conference can we actually expect?
Before the conference, the special report was released, and the report was about the global, let's say, situation, and was not very optimistic. The title of this report proposed by host was "Destruction of the Order." I hope that the main outcome after this conference would be much better and more positive than before. So this is my strong belief that just simply because of the time and place where people may talk each other and meet, the outcome should be definitely better than we expect before. It's not a secret that there were so many difficulties between Europe and United States, including trade, investments, US military presence in Europe. But I really hope that after this conference, there will be much more positive statements made by politicians from both sides.